This is the Slide of the Net podcast in association with the BFG podcast. Today, we are honoured to have the General Manager of the Wellington Phoenix, David Doan, back on the program. Welcome back to the show, David.
Hi guys, good to be here.
So I think Denise is going to start us off today.
Looks like I'm up to bat first. You put my questions on top, so yes, I'm ready to go here. So yeah, we've had the women's team up and running for a couple seasons now. What have we learned? I'm curious what your take homes have been.
Yeah, we have learned a lot over the first 2 years about how to set it up right. And we now want to migrate to a slightly more professional program and trying to make it as a 12-month or how do we get the players to be focused on football, and how do we get it to be so that it's slightly more professional than we've had in the last couple of years. Not to say it wasn't the last 2 seasons, but we've obviously learned some stuff in terms of how to set the program up. The facility here at NZCIS is excellent, and the women get exactly the same access that the men get here. So we've got that part of the equation down pat, but we're now looking at how to structure the women's team going forward. So the idea is next year, and this is again, this is still very new. Paul Temple's away with the under-20s in Argentina, so before he left, we started talking about how we want to set it up. But the idea is that the women would train in the morning like the men, which gives them the afternoon to do whatever they're doing, whether that be an afternoon session or whether it be work or whether it be study. We think that's a slightly better way to set it up. And then we'll revisit the back office and make sure we've got all the support that they need. We had a nice piece of research that the PFA did on the women's team, which they circulated to us last week, which kind of reinforced some of our thinking, which was excellent. It said where we were good and where we needed to improve. And we'll take those learnings and we'll build a better program. I think it's certainly, we have to look at it's basically we'll pull apart the whole thing and put it back together again. Like I say, the trainings, I think the trainings will be different. I think the travel was pretty good. I think that was all right. Pre-season needs to be improved. I think Nat identified that when she was there. So we need to play against A-League W opposition in the pre-season. So we're looking at that now, and we want to strengthen the team. So as you all know, we were hampered a little bit last 2 seasons by essentially not being allowed to sign international players. If we did, they had to come off a New Zealand allocation. We've just been spending some time working with APL and Football Australia to get the regs updated. And hopefully within the next 3-4 weeks, that will be updated accordingly. We don't absolutely know, but hopefully it's going in the right direction. Got another call in the next couple of days, but yeah, that would be great. Essentially, it's just align the women and the men to be the same. And then we will look, we've already started talking to Paul about, international players, who we can bring in, what would he like to bring in. I think, it's not rocket science that the teams that do well in ADW have very good number 9s. So is there a number 9 out there that we can bring in to help strengthen the squad? Look, there's still a lot of support from the board to push on with the A-League W side. I think we still will have a lot of New Zealand players, a lot of young New Zealand players. I think that's very good for us. And the New Zealand players that we've had have been excellent. If you look at, Mickey Foster and Millie Clegg and Kate Taylor and Mackenzie Barry, all of these players. I mean, the difference, the improvement and the way they've come on as players in the last 2 years, really, really exciting. So yeah, we obviously want to carry on with that, but we just want to strengthen in a few key areas.
Is there anything structural about the A-League women that prevents year-round professional play?
The contracts only go for 9 months at the moment, whereas the men go for essentially 12 months, which is 11 months plus 4 weeks annual leave. So the contracts for the ADW are exactly the same for every single team. So that you're only contracted to the AEW for that season. What we want to try and do is obviously that'll get longer and longer. And APL have said they want to migrate to 12-month contracts in due course. And as more teams come in, that will, by definition, that will happen, right? You'll have more games in each season, and we want to get to a 9-month, 10-month, 11-month kind of season eventually, and it will get there in time. The thing is for us, given that most of the players are still coming from outside Wellington, how do we get them to Wellington, and how do we get them, again, because we can't pay them an A-League W contract, so they're going to be doing something else in that time. Like, how do we get them to Wellington so they can be doing, either it's through our academy, playing in the reserve side, or doing some other kind of work so they can turn it into a full-time career, which some of them do now. So quite a few of the players already have other jobs outside football, and that's how they make it work. But over time, we're going to have more and more players like that.
So that 3 months is more of a keep them sharp rather than pay them to play kind of situation.
We can't play them to play. Yeah, we can't play them to play because the contracts don't extend that far. And if you did, that'd be outside. That would fall into salary cap. But is there other work that they can do in those other 3 months? And can we as a club facilitate that? But again, whether it's a study with our AUT program that we run through the academy, that degree that we run through AUT in the academy, can they do that? Or is it some other sort of part-time work? And quite a few of the players already do that now. So it's just migrating to a more formalised structure around that.
You mentioned looking for a number 9. I can't let that one go. I mean, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of top athletes, top female footballers coming to the region this summer. I mean, anyone thought about talking to a few of them?
We've already done that. We've already talked to a few of those people. We've identified a few. Some of them are already contracted outside the World Cup, so for next year ADW. So we've already been down that path. I've also reached out to a few other people, my own contacts, and they, to be honest, Denise, they are more expensive than we originally had anticipated. But that's okay. We're not discouraged by that at all. Most of it's going to come down to availability. The A-League W season's not as favourable as it has been in the past to getting players out of United States, for example. There's now more of an overlap than there used to be. But there will be players. And if you look at, some of the other clubs, how they've managed to do it, we can do it. It can be done. Those investigations have already started. And certainly, if you look at the players who are coming down for the World Cup, I would suggest that most of them are heavily already contracted into European leagues, which just doesn't work. And they're not going to want to leave a European league to come to Australia and New Zealand because they're almost on full-time contracts. I reached out to a few players in South America, and they are now on 11-month contracts. And they are on, 100,000 plus US. So they're on, the money's now improving for women's football, which is really, really good, except it makes it much harder for us to get the top players to New Zealand now because they've become comparatively more expensive. But there will be players that we will be able to get, and we're investigating that now.
There's some great players in South America, some great players in Mexico, obviously, I mean, geez, what an opportunity. I mean, Mexico team is not coming to the World Cup, which is unfortunate because they are a fun team to watch. Yeah. Something else. Okay. So tell me about the process you use to get a women's coach for your team. Yeah. I mean, tell me about Paul. I mean, one of the things I'll be honest, one of the things I was a little skeptical on was, did you just choose a guy because he was, sitting right next to you? Or, did you have a short list? Did you have a process? Just tell me about it.
Yeah, we had a process. So the first thing we did the end of season review with Nat, and that uncovered a few of the things that we wanted to work on. And then we looked around. As like, is there a female coach in New Zealand? And there just isn't. There was no one without the skills. Gemma and Nat are the only really skilled female coaches. There are some coming through. We've got Katie in our academy as an example, Katie Barrett in our academy, and there are a few others. But obviously, you need experience to be head coach for A-League W. You need experience. We don't want it to be a development position necessarily. Certainly with support staff, you can use more. You can be a little bit more lenient. But we want that team to be competitive. We want that team to win games. So we don't want to put somebody in there who's just going to be a development coach for us. So we did look around. Wherever possible, the club is moving to promote from within strategy, and that's across the board, whether it's players, whether it's staff. And you've seen that with Chiefy and the men's team, and a lot of the support staff now we want to promote from within. So coming through our academy, we're developing excellent people, support staff, and these people should be given the first crack because they've committed to the club. And same with on the women's side now. So we want to have as many, and you'll see in the academy now, we're appointing women S&C coaches, we're women physios. We're very conscious of the fact we've got a women's team, then we need women support staff to support the women's team. And we're doing that at the moment, and those people have started already. And those people will come through over time, they'll come through into the first teams. And that includes the coaches. So we really want them to be in our camp. Even so, when we looked around for who wanted to be the head coach next year, we did look outside the club, but there was nobody that we felt would have the same experience that Paul does. He's coached women's teams. He was under 17 coach. He's got a lot of head coach experiences with the under 20s in Argentina at the moment. Do you know what I mean? There's really, really good experience, and he's been heavily involved in the women's side since we've started the program the last 2 years. He's been heavily involved in the coaching of those teams. So really, really good experience. And then when he interviewed, he nailed it, absolutely nailed it in terms of what we wanted to do, where we wanted to go. We were talking about the number 9s. He came to the table with here are 8 players that I want to, international players that I want to sign. So he'd already thought about that. He'd already thought about the structure. He'd already thought about the New Zealand players. He'd already thought about the players in the current team that he wanted to recruit. And why he wanted to recruit them, where the weaknesses were. So he interviewed or presented twice in that process, and just really well thought out. He thought about budgeting, he thought about his support staff. So when we went through it, there's really no one who in New Zealand who could even come close to that level of experience and also nailing the strategy. And the other thing with Paul, of course, is he gives us that link to the academy. So he knows all the girls in the academy, he knows the girls in the first team, and he knew the ones that were ready to step up. And he also knew which ones we need a bit more development, where we need with more experience. So just very aligned. It just made so much sense. And again, where possible, we want to promote from within, because it gives career progression for staff, for players and staff. And so it just ticked a lot of boxes for us.
Fair enough. The more and more I hear about him, the more and more, I'm being sold. And
the other thing for me, Denise, is with Paul stepping up to that role, it then frees up another position with the academy. So now somebody else in the academy then can step up to the academy director role, and that person who's moved up to the academy director role, that position becomes free within the academy. We move people around, and they all start to progress. And so we're doing a job of developing these coaches and these support staff within our own program, so that when the next time somebody leaves and goes on to a better job somewhere else, another person is in there ready to go. And it becomes very, very seamless. Again, because they know the players, they've built the relationships with the players, they've built the relationships with the staff. We know that Paul can work with Chiefy and it's seamless integration there. We know that he can work with Gilly. We know that he can work with all the coaches in the academy. He's been mentoring Katie Barrett through. So it just, again, it just makes so much sense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I'll admit I had a knee-jerk reaction, because it's a big world, just like you're searching for number 9s. It's a big world to search for coaches, and I just wanted to make sure you nailed it. And a lot of people sitting on this call are like, no, he nailed it. So I want to banter about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've gone external and it was a disaster. At previous times we've gone external with coaches and, with European coaches, and it did not work at all. The cultural leap, you can't underestimate sometimes the cultural leap that has to be taken. I mean, Ufi was good. Now, Ufi came from outside our camp, of course, but then, the Australian to New Zealand leap's not as great as a European or an American or a South American leap. And Ufi was particularly good, but Chiefy's been here like almost 5 years now, and he's a Kiwi, right, for our purposes. He's a Wellingtonian now. He's been here so long, and we don't have the gap. So we were very, would we go down the path we discussed with New Zealand Football whether Yitkill could do the job? This was way back at the start before Gemma got the job. We were asking about Yitka. New Zealand Football didn't want to go down that pathway, so we went, okay. Then Gemma came in. I thought, and both Gemma and Nat were the right people, were the right coaches at that time, and now we've moved on to a slightly different model.
Cool. Thank you for that. Blake, bring it.
So you've actually answered a few of my questions, so I'm going to have to go off the fly here. So I have a concern about Paul as a coach as well, because my only concern is you gave it a 2-year deal, right? And you gave Natalie and Gemma 1-year deals. Now Gemma did sign a second one and then had to pull out for her reasons. What's your reasoning around offering Paul a 2-year deal? Because to the outside, and I've said this on social media, even not intentional, it kind of make it look like you favour male coaches.
No, well, you've got to remember when Gemma took over, it was a brand new scenario and they were based in Wollongong. It was a completely different kettle of fish. So we had no idea what was going to happen after that first year. And it was a new model where we were sort of partnering with New Zealand Football. And you're right, Gemma did accept the second year, but then pulled out to go back to Wales to do a pro licence, which we're, of course, very supportive of. So then Nat came in as essentially completing the second year of that cycle. So it was really tied into that those first 2 years where it was a collab with the New Zealand government, tied into the Women's World Cup through New Zealand Football, and that was always going to be the first cycle. Was going to be that. And given that it was so unknown going into a first women's campaign based in a different country. Put it this way, if we had signed somebody else, a female coach, they would have been given a 2-year contract. Because remember now, it's fully New Zealand, it's fully Wellington Phoenix, which it's fully our program. So you need that kind of longevity. You need to give whoever the head coach is needs to be given some sense of security that they can pull together a program. The first 2 years were very unusual. I mean, that's never going to happen again. Touch wood, where you're based overseas and it's a collab with the National Federation in terms of player selection and all that sort of stuff.
So why is player signing for the women appear to be a lot slower compared to the men?
Part of it is because the head coach is in Argentina with under 20 side. Although, like I say, he'd already had some very strong thoughts on that. But I can tell you now, Sean Gill's right onto it.
Right. How do we retain players? Because there's a lot of rotation similar to the men's team, and we're losing a lot of quality. So how do we fix that issue?
We're losing quality for the women's team, you think?
Correct.
Well, how many women's players have we lost so far?
We've only got 2 signed for the.
Yeah, but none of them have actually lost and signed and contracted with somebody else. So you have to give it some chance. Like I say, we're still working through the process now with some of the players. The reality is that some of the players are now going, well, potentially we want this in our contracts, we want that in our contracts. So it's a bit more elongated process than it was in the past. But we've already announced a few players, and there'll be more coming in the foreseeable future. And I think I'm confident it'll be a strong team. And here's the other thing, right? If we are going to sign international players, we need to keep positions up our sleeves. Now, a lot of international players won't even look at contracts until after the Women's World Cup. They just won't. If they're in and around those national teams, we've already had feedback with the guy. They're saying, look, yeah, thanks for the interest, but we're going to get through the Women's World Cup, and then we'll make a decision. Some of the New Zealand players are actually exploring options overseas, and fair play to them. If they want to go and play in Europe, I think they're going to crack it. Some of them now have agents, when previously they haven't had agents. Agents, by definition, slow the process up. They will always slow the process up because that's their job. They want to find the best deal for them, for their player, right? So some agents are slowing us up and putting us on hold. So it's not the club that's not signing the players. It's the player who wants to hold off till after the World Cup.
Yeah. But with all due respect, we, as supporters, we don't want to have to be rebuilding every season and create the same culture as maybe the men's team, for example.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about the men's team is the players that have not been recontracted. I can tell you, or every single one of them had a very attractive deal on the table that 9 times out of 10 they would take. And that the reason they didn't take it is because they themselves wanted to keep their options open. So they wanted to do the best thing for them as a player, which is fine. But if a player says, I don't want to sign, or if I'll sign a contract, but I want an out right up till 4 weeks before the end of the season starts, we're not going to take that. We're not going to be that club which is going to be held over a barrel, because if a player leaves us 4 weeks out before the start of the season, we're stuffed. Like, the ability to sign a player is almost zero 4 weeks out, unless you want to go overseas and get journeymen. We don't want journeymen. We want players who are committed to the club. Other players, it doesn't matter what we do, if they want to go play in another country, they will go play in another country. And often it's not the player, it's often the partner, or it's something else not unrelated to the club, where they've gone, I want to be based somewhere else. And it doesn't matter if you put a 3-year deal, a 4-year deal, or 5-year deal on the table, very attractive. If they want to play in another country, it doesn't matter what you do. So we're going, at the end of the day, you've got to be committed to us. If you're not committed to us, thanks for the service, but we'll move on and we'll find players that are going to be committed. Otherwise, you'll get to the season and you've got journeymen who aren't really committed to the club. And that means that we lose 3 or 4 players each year. Then I'm actually comfortable with that, because do you know what actually gets me excited? If you watch the under-20s, there are some cracking players playing for New Zealand who are in our Wellington Phoenix Academy. And I'm looking at them going, that's the future of this football club, is that under-20s, those under-20 players. And if you look at the game we played against Uzbekistan, 3, 4 of the 5 best players on the pitch were Wellington Phoenix players. And why wouldn't you roll the dice on one of those players as opposed to a journeyman in Australia or a player who doesn't want to be with you? You know, we've done it. Like we've been criticised in the past. You know, we let players go. Uli De Vere goes, and then Ufi finds Oscar Zavada. You know what I mean? There's players will move where players want to move. We didn't lose Uli because he didn't want to play for the Wellington Phoenix. We lost Uli because he had family reasons to want to go and play in Sydney. And we're going, well, we can't compete with that. We can't pick the club up and move it to Sydney because a player's family would rather be based in Sydney than be based in Wellington. We can't compete with that. All we can do is, we now have a world-class facility here at NZCIS, the best training facility in the league, really strong support structures, a club that really wants to grow and is investing into, you know, what it means, our culture, which we're just working on now. I mean, we're doing the very best we can to retain the players we want to keep. At the end of the day, a player doesn't want to play. It's like a staff member. If a staff member gets a better offer and wants to go work somewhere else, you can't stop them. Even if you put an outstanding offer on the table, it's very rare these days for players to get 3-year, 4-year, 5-year deals. And if a player's turning that down, all power to them.
Holly? Oh,
sorry.
Blake, ready?
Sorry.
Okay.
And finally, are you confident you can attract overseas players? You said earlier you've got contacts. Are you confident you can make New Zealand appealing?
For men and women or just men?
For women, sorry.
Yeah, I think, again, if I look at what we have here at NZCIS, you know, why wouldn't you want to come here? But and part of it is, I mean, there is certainly, and I've been talking to my contacts, there is certainly, I mean, New Zealand has a great brand as a country and a place to live and work and all that sort of stuff. So you know, players are no different from any other person. Like what any other staff member. Some people are driven by money. Some people are driven by culture. Some people are driven by flexibility. Some people are driven by the actual role and what they can do, how they feel they can contribute. So when we talk to players, we try and find out what's the driver for them, what's going to interest them to come to this country, and if you really want them, then you work in that space. Like if they're coming for the lifestyle, then you work on the lifestyle and you say, well, this is what we can offer you. If they're coming because they want the money, then you put the best money on the table. And often, as usual with most people, it's a combination of all those things. But yeah, I mean, you know, there are always restrictions, obviously. You know, we have a budget that we have to work to. Like I say, I think I've stated this previously, we spent more money on the women this year than any other club. and we spent more money than we've ever spent in the men's space than we spent any other year. Were we successful? No. The women still came the last on the table, and the men went out in the first week of the finals. So it's not, it's a difficult, tricky balance that we have to make, and we're now looking at and going, well, what's the strategy of this club going forward? We're given a couple of cracks of really spending a lot of money, and we didn't make the grand final for the men, and the women didn't perform as high as we wanted to. We've always said we wanted to be in the final series. We didn't make the final series. So there are challenges. So within that space, we're going, well, how do we get maximum bang for our buck?
Thank you.
So I wanted to talk about supporter feedback and consultation. It's really good to see that there's the fan survey out right now, which obviously you won't have the results for. I'm assuming you don't have the results for. There's also the new fan consultation group. How do you envisage that sort of functioning? How will this feedback be received and considered?
The representative group?
Yes, that's right.
Right. So the plan there is the APL wants that group to meet quarterly. I think we'll do that more frequently with Wellington Phoenix. It's something that we've wanted to do for a while. It's been difficult, obviously, when we've been based overseas, but now we come back, and when they raise the APL, I mean, this is perfect timing for us. It's about time we needed to move in something in the space. It's a really good format because it now ties into what every other club is doing or should be doing, and also it ties into what our APL want to do from the central. So now that closes the loop on that. So we're looking at that. We've just got together the group, and I think we're going to announce the final names in the next couple of days. There was just one person who we couldn't get hold of, and I think they've managed to get hold of that person now. And then that group will meet probably remotely, because it's going to. I mean, we've been very careful. Well, not careful, but we wanted to make sure that we had a good distribution of people. We wanted people based in New Zealand and some in Australia, because, as you know, Holly, there's some really strong participant groups and fan groups in Australia. We want to make sure we cover those views, and we want a nice gender balance, and we want a nice age balance. And, we don't want it to be so big and that it becomes unmanageable, because if you have a group of 30 people, and it's just, you can't use those opinions. And again, it's going to be mostly a qualitative kind of an exercise. It's mostly just, we'll meet probably once every 6 weeks via, remote digital means, with an agenda going through a few items. We'll also use it to canvass opinions, like when's the best time to play. I think we've put a couple of questions into the research piece, because, we've been asking the league for years to give us Saturday afternoon kicks off at 3 p.m. So we put Saturday afternoon kickoffs at 3 p.m. and nobody turned up. Right, so we're going, well, that didn't work. So, we put some questions in the research project as to when do you want our games to be. But a whole lot of things, how do you want us to do this? How do you want to do that? So we'll meet there regularly, and then there's one representative from that group will go on to the APL, which I think they're looking at doing quarterly. I'm not quite sure, but I don't. It may not have decided. But yeah, we'll meet more frequently than the suggested timeframe from APL, and use it as a forum just to canvass opinions, and then potentially take those opinions forward. But also give us as a club, the ability to feed back to those people in that group why we do things the way we do them, because you're right, it's hard to get some of that messaging across, without doing a media release, make a big song and dance about it, as to why we go to Auckland and play 2 games up there, as to why we have to we play in the blue at home. Do you know what I mean? And we've sort of ad nauseum we've been trying to explain why that is, and we still get criticism. And anyway, it is what it is. So it's hard to make everybody happy all the time, but it will be a way for us to feed back to those people in that group, and hopefully that then just disseminates through the ranks, whether it be on social media or on their own channels, about some of the decisions the club makes.
I have to say, you've always been very receptive when we've had a conversation with you. I feel like you're probably quite frequently accosted when you were spotted by a Wellington Phoenix fan, and then sort of had to talk your ears off. But I do appreciate it, because I think a lot of senior club management and a lot of those clubs are just not available at all. So is it a bit tiring to be constantly, in the street? Or
no, not at all, not at all. When I went to Wollongong, I said I had to get in touch with, not Wollongong, sorry, Macarthur. I had to get in touch with the Macarthur guys and say, look, I'm coming to the game, but I'm not going to go to the lounge. I just want to hang out with the fans. And I didn't know it was going to be pouring with rain. If I'd known that, I might have made a different choice. Luckily, Clark gave me his poncho. But I did want to reach out to the Macarthur guys. So I'm not snubbing you guys or anything, but I just want to go and hang out with the fans. Because, at the end of the day, Holly, I'm just a fan as well. I was there in the first game, and I just want the club to be successful. And so I totally get when fans have an issue and like, why do we do this and why have we done that and why can't we do that? I get it, right? Because most of the times when I get that feedback, I'm going, yeah, that's exactly what I would have said if I was a fan. And so it does give an opportunity to just to chat with guys. And the fans are like, it's, it is, I'll tell you without a word of a lie, so much more fun hanging out with the fans in the stand than being in the lounge. I would rather watch the game in the rain in Macarthur than being stuck in the lounge. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't even, and I think I got the train back with Clark, and it was it was awesome. It's like an hour back from Macarthur and being able to chew the fat and talk about football and clubs and all that kind of stuff. And it's and it was more like a fan conversation than anything else. Yeah, no, sorry, to answer your question, no, it does not bother me in the slightest.
Good. Yeah, no, that Macarthur game was really good. I can't believe you stood in the rain with us, and it was not very warm either. So that was really appreciated. I'm wondering, as a final question from me, how can fans support the club in the off season? So, we can't attend games or watch games. What can we do in this really long off seasons, plural? What can we do to support the club?
That's a good question. For us, it's keeping the momentum going, keeping the chatter going. Like even social media comment, that's all good, right? Like clicking on posts, because we use that when we go back to our commercial partners and we click on a post, or the research thing was really, really good. That was a really good way to do it, because we're using, without a word of a lie, the information in that. One of our corporate partners asked us for some fan feedback, which we didn't have through. They've done this piece of work in Australia, but they didn't do it in New Zealand. They only did Phoenix fans in Australia, the perception of the Phoenix brand in Australia, which came back was unbelievable, by the way. Like they had this sort of algorithm and the scoring method of all sporting brands in Australia, and we were the 4th highest scorer out of all the brands in Australia. So this included, the Sydney Swans and the Roosters and the Raiders and the Demons, all of their sporting teams. The one in Phoenix, and this algorithm, which included everything from how much you support the club, your mix of your gender mix of your supporters, how likely you are to support corporate partners. They ask all these questions, they put in this algorithm, and then it scores how good you are as a club. And we were 4th, which was an amazing result. And of course, we sent that to our corporate partners and said, well, look, the Phoenix does very, very well with their supporter base. And then it said, and then of course one of our partners said, well, that's great. It's just that's Phoenix support in Australia. What about in New Zealand? And we go, well, we don't actually have it because it was an expensive piece of research that was done by, it's an organisation called YouGov in Australia. So it's a big research house, and it wasn't necessarily supported. We didn't fund it, and the clubs didn't fund it, but it was just done through that research institute. So then we kind of we try to replicate it with that piece of research that you've seen. So that'll give us some information that we can go back to our partners with to sort of, let's say, well, it's still very strong in New Zealand as well. And in fact, a couple of years, maybe it was 10 years ago now, the Phoenix was like the 2nd most supported club in New Zealand outside the Warriors. I don't know what it is now. We haven't done that piece of research for a while. But that's the sort of stuff that certainly does help us a lot. Just keep the chat going. We'll be back on sale with memberships. The community program we're just working on now getting the community program up and running again. We're doing a whole calendar of events that we're pulling together now. It is difficult. I agree, Holly. The off season is so long. It's so long even for us. you know, you have to keep the buzz going in the off season, and it is hard. But no, it's a good question. Mostly it's in you know, I would just think in the social media channels, and like I say, when we do these little research pieces, I looked last night, and I think we've only been out for 2 days or something, and there'd already been about 1,500, 1,600 responses, which is really good. That's really, really good. And like I say, we've only just been on for about 2 days, so I don't know what it is as of this morning. But that's a statistically, you know, significant sample. That's really pleasing.
Am I up to bat again? Yes? Okay, here we go. So I have a bunch of quicker questions. Venue for the women next year. Are we still getting big, or are we going more intimate?
Well, we want to go more intimate. So the trend in Australia is to go to regional stadiums. That to us makes a lot of sense, and we've started work on that. And also Sky is hugely expensive, like massively expensive. Even though we got very good attendances for the women. Really pleased how that started off. You know, we were getting over 1,000 people, which is, you know, right up there in terms of A-League W. So really, especially that first game when we got like 5,000 and we got the record for regular season, and that was really excellent. And the players love it, and it's good. But we are looking at a couple of other Wellington-based ones, of course. We are looking at a couple of Wellington venues, and we started. And the first thing we got back was a quote from Sky about the infrastructure costs. And it's thousands to put the infrastructure in. Oh. So what potentially you would save in lower running costs, overhead costs at Sky, you've lost in infrastructure. So, you know, these things are never easy, but I think as a general rule, we will try and go to regional stadia, because 1,000 people in a 5,000 seat arena, or someone's. And the other thing that it gives us the ability to do is lots more flexibility with a regional stadium. You can do, you know, food carts and bouncy carts. So we've got a lot more freedom to do stuff, and we've got a couple of ideas. And we're, like I say, in fact, before I jumped on this, I was just talking to Wellington City Council about how we can make it work in Wellington. So yeah, dead keen. You know, we think we can do a really good job in a smaller venue, fill it out, you know, great atmosphere. And wrap a whole lot of stuff around it, but it's actually not as easy as you'd think.
I have another question, just a player safety kind of thing. Has there been talk about these like really hot midday games and that you send your players to in Australia?
Yeah, they're absolutely right. So they completed a review of A-League W season in Australia, and that was one of the because they do some double headers in Australia, and obviously the women tend to be the first game, and they've said, well, you can't kick off at 1 o'clock or midday in Australia in the middle of summer. So that's been identified, and I think it will be. I'd be surprised if you see. I mean, New Zealand obviously it's less of an issue, but I'd be surprised if you see the women kicking off at quite or as many games. Anyway, that's kind of left with the APL to work out what they call the domestic match calendar and the kickoff times. But yeah, no, it was certainly raised as an issue.
I need to follow up on something. You said there was more money spent on the Wellington Phoenix women than any other women's team. Where did that money go? What was it spent on? Just so we all have a bit more context.
We paid a lot of money in accommodation allowances. So where the salaries we paid to the players was about mid-table in terms of we weren't the cheapest and we weren't the most expensive, but we paid a lot of money in accommodation allowances. And the reason for that, obviously, is 90% of the team came from outside Wellington. There are a lot of very young players who didn't have jobs. So it was originally set up, obviously, when we did it, we did it on the basis that they were going to be based in Wollongong. So the first year they had to, you can't ask a 17, 18, 19-year-old player to uproot from New Zealand, send them to Wollongong and then ask them to pay for rent. So when we originally did it, we go, well, we've got to cover that cost. So then it just rolled into the second year as well, because that's the way we set it up. So we were paying those accommodation allowances in the second year again, because most of those players. But now that we've got a full-time program, or we've got a locked-in program, the proposition is if you're playing for the women A-League W, Wellington Phoenix A-League W side, you should be based in Wellington. and we'll help you find jobs. So we're no longer will be paying accommodation allowances. But having said that, Denise, we're not going to be the lowest paying salaries either. And like I say, we're also going to look at international players. So we may not be the most expensive, or sorry, pay the most in player salaries, because you'll probably find that's still going to be the Melbourne Cities and the Sydneys of the world who will pay the most in salaries. But what we certainly will do will be up in the top half of the table. But the corollary to that is, if you're up there, then you should be making the finals. So if you're top four, that's how we measure the success of our programs. Where at the end of the year we do analysis as where do we sit in the table, and if you're the 5th highest player, then you should be in the top 5. And if you're the 4th highest player, you should be in the top 4. That's how we do it for the women, and that's how we do the analysis for the men. And obviously that didn't work. We overperformed with the men. So in terms of our finishing position, but for the women, actually probably maybe not for the men, maybe right on it actually. But for the women, obviously we were way behind. But again, accommodation allowances isn't really a salary, but it does enable players that are not out of pocket. So we were essentially covered the accommodation. They didn't have any rent for the year essentially.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. I know that was a big perk recently in the NWSL last couple of years that they covered. It's a 12-month contract covering accommodation.
Yeah, and inevitably, some players, whether it's accommodation allowance or you pay them more, you need to help some players, especially with the imports, right? So they come in, and if you're only, depending on what their salary is, they might need some form of accommodation allowance to get them over. But often you find you end up, like for some of the players coming from overseas, we had to pay for their relocation because they were coming from Europe or wherever. You have to make it, equitable, so they're not paying for their flights to come play for the Wellington Phoenix.
Do we have any partnerships with other teams around the world? I remember you mentioning something about Angel City or
I've chatted with Julie Ullman, who's the CEO of Angel City, and we've had a number of conversations with a few team clubs in the United States, mostly in the women's space, to be honest. But then nothing's formalised. But it is something that we are looking at. You have to find the right club and the right proposition. And we haven't quite found that yet. Like I say, there are a couple of ongoing discussions at the moment. Last time I spoke to Angel City, they were right in the middle of their first season, so they were looking for just to really get through that. So that might be another conversation we're taking up with them at some stage. But whether it's an American club, which actually does make a lot of sense in some ways, given the number of players that go between the two leagues, or a European club, which just makes it a little bit harder because you're not doing both. It's very difficult to do both in Europe, but you might be looking at a second tier player at one of the big European clubs to come and get some experience, which is what I think Sydney did very well with their players and the players they brought in, and Western United. They brought in good players out of the United States who weren't tier 1 but were tier 2, but they did an amazing job.
There's a new league in America. It's what was the tier 2 men's USL. USL sponsored a new league, and they're trying to compete with the NWSL as a tier 1, which is kind of interesting and exciting. And you mentioned Angel City at they're valued at 100 million, Gotham at 40 million, Washington at 35 million. I mean, these are all unaffiliated clubs. What do you think of that?
The American competitions, where it's the men or the women's side, they're often held up as an example of potentially where the A-Leagues is going to go. Where, if you're looking, 10 years ago, you could buy an MLS franchise for 100 million. Now you're looking at $500 million plus. So you can buy one for 500 million, but you got to build a stadium at the same time. And a lot of these clubs, I know New York City, for example, have got a perfectly good stadium in Manhattan, and now they're building another one. I mean, I get there's scale with the United States, but that's kind of what a lot of investors in Silver Lake who invested into the A-Leagues. That's what they looked at. They went, the A-Leagues is a competition ripe for growth, and it might take 5 years, it might take 10 years. But yeah, you look at those franchises. I mean, Angel City is an exception. I mean, that's an exceptional bunch of people who have come together to form that club, and they've done very well. And they'll only, I mean, even the first year, I know they didn't win anything, but yeah, even in their first year, they've performed admirably, and they'll just go from strength to strength. So it's really encouraging. I mean, that's fantastic for football that you've got these kinds of numbers being bandied about for essentially a new product in a relatively new market. But it does show the potential of the sport, and in those countries where it's not the number one code.
For me, it shows just the range of investors, of people who want to invest in the club. And Michelle Kang out of Washington Spirit, she just bought 52% of Olympique Lyonnais, and she's looking to buy more clubs and invest in more clubs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting to me.
It's certainly a model. So I'm part of this FIFA. I'm on a FIFA diploma thing where they've got clubs from all around the world. And interestingly, the challenges that we face at club is universal. It's universal across the board, the challenge that are faced by clubs. And the solution is often the same as well. And most of these clubs are looking for partnerships. They're all looking, whether it's it's a City Football Group model, or it's the next stage down, or it's a looser. It might not be an ownership stake, but it's a looser aggregation of clubs. That's what everyone's looking at, and it is really interesting that more and more clubs are going to go that way. And like I said, this is not new for us. We've been looking at these things and potentially how we can do it in both the men's and women's space. Ideally, it would be good to have the model which is across both of those clubs. But we're looking at whether you could have a relationship in the women's space and a completely different one in the men's space.
Well, Michelle Kang's going shopping, so.
Yeah.
Well, one of the neat things about women's soccer is that there's just some really unusual way of marketing women, that is kind of unique. Like Gotham FC and a number, they started it was these fit walks, these outfit walks where they like get into the stadium in a unique way because they look so hip and cool. And, not that I need these players to do that, but, tell me about like some cool stuff that the Phoenix, can do to bring some joy to these fans.
Yeah,
can they bring their pets?
Yeah, the Americans really do know how to market well. I mean, and we do look to the MLS. If you look, whether it's in football or the basketball is amazing what they do in their social media. MLS, basketball, American football, they do the marketing very, very well, and we're always looking at new and innovative ways to get the message out there. We've done stuff, on our channels, which is, you've seen the players do stuff at NZCIS, using the digital wall here and doing things that are slightly different, working with the Skies and New Zealand Football Fix, trying to do stuff that's innovative with those guys and outside football, so you get to know the players. I mean, that's the key, is right. How do you get to know the players? How do you get to know their personalities? And it is a challenge because it is not like a lot of time. You have to squeeze, without a word of a lie, like when you work out the weekly schedule for a player, it's hard. We have to put aside an afternoon where they do the community work and they do the commercial responsibilities, and that's when they do their social media as well. And we get together. It's only one afternoon a week, although you can potentially slip in other stuff from time to time as well. But it is challenging. But like you say, the thing is how do you get that stuff so that it's interactive and interesting and innovative, and you have the resource to do it as well. And it's not something that I don't think that we've cracked it at all. And it is a challenge that goes in front of the marketing guys and social media guys every year. It's like, how are we going to do this and how are we going to make it interesting? Our social media stats are excellent. They are really, really good. There's a lot of it's heavy, just content. But you got to balance it with content in terms being interesting. It can't just be content for content. So we are looking up resourcing in that space.
Are they still the highest in the league?
We are for YouTube. So our YouTube channel is the number one YouTube channel in the league. We're good in Twitter, we're in the top half, TikTok top half, Instagram bottom half. I don't know why we're not quite as strong in Instagram as in the other channels. It's not as if we don't put as much focus on it, because we do. So generally, again, as if you're looking at the table, you know, where we are on the table in terms of size of the club, we're outperforming where we should be. But no, it's a constant challenge. And like I say, we are looking at resourcing in that space in the next couple of months.
So
one last question.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Jonathan to wrap this up quickly for us.
Fire your question, Denise, because you're on a roll. You got some fantastic questions this morning, and David's really been in the hot seat, so let's not let him out of it too soon.
It was just more like a fun question. You know, one of the strategies that I've seen in America, because, you know, that's where I hang a little bit of the year, is you grab women's sports fans from other leagues. I'm wearing a WNBA. You know, you have some great sports in New Zealand. You know, how do you grab their fans? How do you make it a cultural thing to be fans of sports, even if they're not quite experts yet in football?
It's a $64,000 question, right? It's like, how do you get fans? Like, what engages with fans? And it's multifaceted. It's multifaceted. You have to be strong in your social media. We've done that cross code stuff mostly with the men, where you try to do. And the good thing now is we've got like literally the Hurricanes are next door. The Hurricanes, the Lions are next door, and the Polar, which is the women's rugby team. Although they have a very, very short season. But, you know, there's, I think the rugby guys are coming through, the All Blacks are coming through, well, under-20s are coming through next week. You know, like, what can we do with those guys? The cross-code stuff is really good. It's a good way of doing it. In terms of any of the sports. I think netball is, you know, you're looking at traditional women's sports, netball's very strong. And we've got a really good relationship with Fran Scully, who's the CEO of netball. She's actually leaving now. She's going off to the Paralympics, I think. So we've had a good relationship. We've done a few cross promotions with them in the past. But that's a good point. Is like, how do you maximise that? I know the Pulse are playing this weekend in their semi-final. So you get to this time of the season, it's very hard to do stuff. Maybe it's something you can do in the off season. But yeah, that is a challenge, and it is something that we're looking at. Is how do you, I mean, especially now with the women's team, it's like, how do you grow that base? Because essentially it's a new product, and it's you've got to start from we've got a core, but then how do you continue to grow it? And hopefully the Women's World Cup will make a difference. There's lots of plans about how we can leverage that, and hopefully that'll make a difference. We already do free season tickets for all junior girls players at Capital Football get a free season ticket to the Wellington Phoenix. And that is ideally to get them to come to the games and support the players. There's still is a bit of it's only a loose connection between junior football and professional football at the moment. So you'll get some hardcore that will love football and want to go to all the Phoenix games, but then you'll get some kids who are just playing football for kick around and they're not interested in the Phoenix yet. But again, it comes down to, I mean, how do you get the personalities of the players across? How do you get them? You know, it's a community program, and it's a school visit program, and it's a charity program. It's all part of the big maelstrom you got to pull together.
Yeah, I think the secret to women's football is have some fun. I mean, these fans are craving a good time. You know, like men's fans might be craving just like, to win. But women's football, I mean, it's a blast. You know, the whole event of it is fun.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, you know, is this fun? Does this connect? You know,
I think we found that with our social media with the women last year, where, I mean, you don't want to generalize, but they come across as very authentic. You know, very authentic. I'm not saying the men don't, but they seem to be more willing to show a little bit more of themselves, a little bit, you know, like you say, have a bit more humour. If I look at the stuff they did with Goran Paladin and the Kiwi Football Fix, it was really good and really engaging. And it was really, because they were very natural, you know, they hadn't, you know, and you look, and you forget some of them are very young, like Millie Cleave, 17, 18 years old. And when she does her piece, you go, oh, that's right, she's 17, 18 years old. And she's doing all this stuff. And I'll tell you, we don't do media training here. What we do, like Brenton, who's our media manager, he does give them some advice, but we don't media train them. You don't want to coach that out of them, because that's what just makes it so sterile. So we try to say, just be yourself. And some players are okay with that. I think you look at the players like Chloe, not very, very good in that space. Lily Allfield, she's never been media trained, but it's just a natural. That's just her personality more than anything else. But like I say, we don't coach that. We don't want to coach that out of them. We just want them to be authentic and natural, and just like you say, Denise, just have fun with it. So whenever they turn up and do these pieces with Football Fix or whoever it is, that they come across as very authentic.
That's the funny thing, because Chloe, Lily, and who was the other one? One of the other ones. Mackenzie.
Mackenzie Barry, yeah.
Yeah. They're 3 of our top-rated episodes. So
yeah.
That's really interesting to know. I'm going to let Jonathan close this for a change, because we've been keeping him quiet.
No, you can do it, Blake. You wind us out, mate. You've done a good job.
I feel bad that you don't get to talk. Are you sure? Okay. Well, thank you for coming on the show, David. And as always, it's a pleasure talking to you. And if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe this video, follow us on all your favorite audio platforms, and we'll see you on the next one.